For the past 3 years or so, I've worked as an overnight security guard at a local mall. Originally, they didn't even need someone on duty overnight, but after a few too many incidents, broken windows, tagged walls, a fire extinguisher let loose in the food court, corporate finally decided to bring someone in. That someone ended up being me. Most nights were mind-numbingly quiet. I had cruised the empty parking lot in slow loops, my car radio humming softly in the background, headlights sweeping over row after row of parked shadows. Occasionally, I'd have to shoo away a group of stubborn skateboarders grinding on curbs near the entrance, or check out a lone figure pacing too slowly beneath a flickering light pole. But that was about as exciting as it ever got. The job was predictable, repetitive, uneventful. At least it was until something strange happened about 3 months in. I remember it was just after 3 a.m., that unsettling dead zone of the night where the world feels like it's holding its breath. I was doing another lap around the far end of the lot when something caught my eye. A light, bright and unmistakable, was on inside one of the shops. That immediately sent up a red flag. There was no way someone had gotten in without me noticing. I'd been circling the building all night. I hadn't seen a single soul near any of the doors. So either someone had slipped in without setting off a single alarm, or something else was going on. Either way, I wasn't about to ignore it. I killed the headlights, parked the car near the entrance, and stepped inside the mall. The air inside was still and stale, carrying that faint metallic smell you only notice when everything else is completely silent. As I approached the shop, the fluorescent glow spilling out from under the partially pulled gate made the rest of the corridor feel darker than usual. My boots echoed against the polished tiles, the sound unnaturally loud. Strangely, I didn't hear anything coming from the store. No rustling, no movement, nothing. I reached the storefront and stopped. Empty. Not a single person inside. All the shelves and displays were undisturbed. No broken glass, no pried open drawers. And the gate, the metal security gate that's always pulled down and locked after hours, was still fully shut. Locked from the inside. Only the shop owners had keys to those gates. Not even mall security had access to them. So even though the lights were blazing away inside, there was nothing I could do. No one I could confront, no gate I could open. I just stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the lights and trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I couldn't explain it, still can't. But that was the first time something didn't add up, and it wouldn't be the last. I headed back out to my car, the cool air outside brushing against my skin like a warning I chose to ignore. Another hour passed, dragging by in silence, with nothing unusual to report. I was just starting to settle back into that familiar rhythm when, during another slow loop past the mall's main entrance, something flickered at the edge of my vision. Another light. It was on again, inside the mall. I pulled over instantly, my heart beating just a little harder this time. I locked eyes on the lit storefront from where I sat, unmoving. Same exact situation as before. One of the shops had its interior lights blazing, even though everything else around it was cloaked in darkness. I stepped out of the car, more alert than I had been earlier, and headed back inside. The air felt heavier this time, thicker, like something was waiting. I approached the glowing storefront, my boots once again echoing through the empty corridor. Just like before, the metal security gate was down, locked tight. No sign of forced entry, no sign of disturbance. But that damn light, still burning brightly, casting long shadows across the racks of untouched merchandise. I grabbed the gate and gave it a firm tug, partly to see if it was really locked, partly to make some noise, just in case someone was hiding in there and needed a little encouragement to come out. But it held fast, solid, secure. Then, click. The sound came from behind me. I froze. Slowly, I turned around, scanning the dim hallway. Nothing but the steady buzz of emergency lights and the deep shadows pooling at the corners. And when I looked back at the shop, The light was off. Just off. I stood there for a long second, trying to make sense of it. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. I hadn't exactly been sleeping well lately. In fact, I was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep over the last 48. That's what I told myself anyway. Just exhaustion, just foggy perception, just fatigue. But even with that excuse in the back of my mind, I swear I saw something, a movement behind the counter just before the lights blinked out. A blur of motion, like someone ducking down, hiding. I gritted my teeth and pulled out my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the now dark store interior. My breath caught in my throat. Nothing. No figure, no movement, no confirmation of what I thought I'd seen. Just aisles of clothes and shelves standing quietly in the dark. Another click behind me. I whipped around, the flashlight beam slicing through the air, just in time to see another light go dark, further down the corridor. This time, I was sure of it. I saw someone standing in the shop. They were there, just for a second, before the lights cut. I didn't hesitate anymore. I raised my voice and called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You can either leave with me," I said loudly, the words echoing off the tiled walls, "or you can leave with the police." My voice sounded too loud, too sharp against the silence that followed. No answer, no sound, just the soft hum of electricity and the lingering scent of something stale in the air. I stood there, waiting, listening. But whoever was playing this game wasn't ready to show themselves, at least not yet. They didn't move. Whoever it was just stood there, completely still, right next to the light switch. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus through the shadows. Slowly, I stepped closer to the gate, my flashlight trembling just slightly in my grip. I raised the beam and aimed it directly at the switch. Nothing. No one. The space was empty. The corner where I knew I had seen someone standing a moment earlier was now just a blank stretch of wall. Except there was something else. A nearby clothes rack, oddly close to the switch. And some of the hanging garments were dark, angled in such a way that maybe, just maybe, if the light hit them just right, they could have cast a shadow. Something vaguely human. Something convincing enough to fool a sleep-deprived mind. That explanation was the only thing that made sense. The only thing that let me walk away without questioning my sanity. So I left the mall that night, still rattled, still uneasy, but clinging to the most logical excuse I could come up with. Just shadows, just tricks of the light. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something, that there was more going on than I could see. The strange events from that night lingered in the back of my mind for a while, but as time passed, they faded. Weeks turned into months, and nothing out of the ordinary happened again. My nightly patrols slipped back into their usual rhythm. Quiet, predictable, dull. Until the 1-year mark. That's when the next incident happened. It was winter, bitterly cold, even inside the mall. That night, I was doing one of the less glamorous parts of my job, checking the pipes. See, technically I was security, but somewhere along the line, the mall owners decided they could save a little money by lumping a few extra responsibilities onto my plate. Minor maintenance stuff. Check this, wiggle that, make sure nothing's frozen or leaking. It was whatever. I just finished inspecting one of the mechanical closets when I felt the familiar pressure in my bladder. So I made my way through the quiet halls toward the nearest bathroom. The mall was silent as always, lit only by dim nightlights that cast long shadows and made every empty space feel just a little off. I pushed open the heavy restroom door, already reaching for my belt. Flush. The sudden sound of a toilet startled me more than I'd like to admit. My chest jumped and I froze mid-step. The automatic toilet had flushed by itself. Inside, the bathroom was empty, cold tile, a faint chemical smell, that sterile, lifeless silence you only find in buildings after hours. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the last gurgle of the toilet settling. Motion sensors. They were motion-activated toilets, just like every other modern mall bathroom. The sensors could be overly sensitive sometimes. Maybe the door opening triggered it. Maybe it was just coincidence. Still, I walked slowly past the row of sinks, each one dry and spotless, and began opening stall doors one by one. Empty. Every single one. No shoes beneath any of them, no sound, no movement. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of overhead fluorescent lights. I stood there in the center of the room for a moment longer, surrounded by walls and mirrors and echoes, trying not to imagine something standing just out of view. Eventually, I convinced myself to get it over with, do what I came to do, finish the shift, go home. But in the back of my mind, that uncomfortable silence whispered something I didn't want to hear. You're not alone. I'll spare you the obvious details, but after checking the stalls and finding them empty, I picked one and took a seat. I wasn't in any rush, just needed a moment to decompress. I pulled out my phone, propped it on my thigh, and started playing a YouTube video. Something light. Maybe a podcast or a review, just enough noise to distract me from how unsettling that restroom felt. That was when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, deliberate tapping coming from the stall directly next to mine. My body stiffened. I instinctively paused the video. Silence. Then, tap. Tap. I glanced to my left, down near the gap between the wall and the floor, and saw them. A pair of shoes. Men's shoes. Large. Worn. Just standing there. The toes were pointed directly toward me, motionless, like whoever was wearing them had been standing there for a while. Watching. Every hair on my body stood on end. Slowly, very slowly, I tilted my head back and lifted my gaze to the top of the stall divider. And that's when I saw him. The tallest man I'd ever seen. He was looming, actually looming above the partition, bent slightly at the neck, just tall enough to stare down at me from above the stall wall. His head barely fit between the ceiling and the divider. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. His eyes locked on mine. My breath caught. My entire body went rigid. If I hadn't already been sitting on the toilet, I might have bolted right then and there, or worse. But the moment he realized I'd seen him, he dropped. Not climbed down, not walked away, dropped. Straight down, vanishing from view beneath the partition in one unnatural fluid motion. I was up in an instant. Heart hammering in my chest, I kicked open the stall door and lunged toward the one next to mine. I slammed it open. Nothing. Empty. Completely empty. Except those shoes. They were still there, sitting neatly in the exact spot I'd seen them under the divider. Just the shoes. No legs. No person. No explanation. I stared at them, chest heaving, my brain scrambling to find some kind of logic, some way to make it make sense. But nothing came. Just that creeping sensation crawling down my spine. I backed out of the stall, out of the bathroom, and didn't stop moving until I was outside and back in my car. I didn't even remember the walk. One moment I was inside that icy tiled restroom, and the next I was gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. If memory serves, it was around 4 a.m. when it happened. Once again, I tried to blame it on the usual suspect: sleep deprivation. 2 days of terrible rest, hallucinations, stress, fatigue, The mind does weird things when it's running on fumes. That's what I kept telling myself. And sure, maybe it was all in my head. But at that moment, I didn't care. I was just glad I had the next day off. My friend and I once took a trip to the infamous, long-abandoned Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio. For privacy's sake, I'll call my friend Jake. It was one of those impulsive teenage adventures. No school the next day, no real plans, just a thrill-seeking itch we decided to scratch. We headed out around 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night, armed with flashlights, phones, and the kind of overconfidence that comes with youth and boredom. Getting in wasn't hard. We found a side entrance where someone, probably a dozen someones over the years, had already jammed the door open. The frame was bent, paint peeled back like old skin, and the interior swallowed every trace of the moonlight behind us. The moment we stepped inside, the darkness was absolute. Not just dim or shadowed, pitch black. We stood in the entryway for a minute, letting our eyes adjust, our flashlights still on. Then, for some stupid reason, we both clicked them off, just to feel it, just to experience how deep the dark inside really was. It was suffocating. The air smelled like mildew, rotting carpet, and damp concrete, like the building had been sealed in time, slowly decaying in its own silence. Eventually, we switched our lights back on and started to explore. We made our way through the lower level first, passing collapsed store signs, shattered glass, and broken tiles that crunched underfoot. Most of the shops were empty, just hollowed out husks with faded lettering above their gates and nothing but dust and forgotten hangers inside. We found an old escalator and climbed it to reach the second floor. The escalator stairs were cold under our palms and groaned slightly beneath our weight, like the building resented being disturbed. Once we reached the top, we began shining our lights into the abandoned storefronts again. Dust floated in the air like ash. Some of the stores still had mannequins in them, faceless, cracked, and half-dressed, standing like forgotten sentinels. That's when we heard it. A loud bang, sharp and sudden, echoing from deeper down the upper level. I froze. Jake stopped walking too, and we both turned our flashlights in the direction of the sound. It had come from somewhere past the rows of sealed-up shops and collapsed signs. My heart skipped. Could that be security or the cops? I whispered. Jake shook his head. Doubt it, he said under his breath. Probably just more people like us, exploring. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tension under it. Still, we didn't want to take chances. We turned and started moving in the opposite direction, quietly, cautiously, just in case. We'd made it near the old JCPenney, one of the anchor stores in the mall, when it happened again. Another bang. Louder this time, and closer. We stopped dead in our tracks. This time, we didn't speak. Without a word, we both clicked off our flashlights. Darkness swallowed us. It felt alive, thick and pressing, like something crawling along the edges of our vision. We didn't know who or what was making those sounds, but we weren't about to wait around and find out. In the darkness, we did our best to move, quietly, slowly, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and that sound. Each step felt blind, each shuffle of our feet a gamble against bumping into a wall or tripping over forgotten debris. And still, the silence hung around us like a held breath. Suddenly, I heard a sound, soft, almost muffled. It came from a little further ahead, somewhere in the darkness just beyond where my eyes could reach. It sounded like someone quietly calling out, "Psst." I assumed it was Jake. It had to be Jake. The voice wasn't clear, but it was faintly familiar, muted by distance, or maybe the way it bounced off the empty walls around us. I kept hearing it, just low, urgent repetitions, and I followed it, my feet dragging carefully over the uneven floor, arms stretched slightly in front of me. Psst. Closer now. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I kept going, using the sound as a guide. The darkness felt suffocating, like it was pressing in tighter the deeper I went. Eventually, I reached where I thought the sound had been coming from. I leaned in close, whispering, "Jake, where do we go now?" No answer. The silence felt wrong. Uneasy, I started feeling around in the dark, searching for Jake, or at least something solid to orient myself. My fingers brushed up against a shoulder, someone standing there, unmoving. But the fabric under my hand wasn't right. It was coarse, rougher than what Jake had been wearing. Jake had on a puffy nylon coat that night. This felt more like canvas or thick wool. A chill shot down my spine. I raised my other hand slowly and reached for my flashlight, breath caught in my throat. Click. The light flicked on, and I screamed. Staring back at me was not Jake. It was a tall man, wearing a black beanie pulled low and a face mask that covered most of his face. Only his eyes were visible, cold and sharp, locked onto mine. Before I could react, he lunged. He grabbed me hard and yanked me into a tight headlock, his arms cinching around my neck. I struggled, gasping, my flashlight clattering to the floor and spinning light wildly across the walls. He began dragging me backward into the darkness, each step jarring, my feet barely able to keep up. Panic surged through me. Then, crack! From the shadows behind us, Jake came out of nowhere. He landed a clean, solid punch straight to the guy's face. I felt the man's grip loosen for just a second, long enough for me to twist free and stumble backward. "Run!" Jake shouted. We didn't need to say anything else. We sprinted through the mall in the direction we came from, crashing through the darkness, not daring to look back. Every sound behind us could have been footsteps or echoes. It didn't matter. We just ran. When we burst through the broken entrance and into the open air of the parking lot, we didn't stop. Not for breath, not to speak. We just kept running until we reached the car. Jake yanked the door open and started the engine with shaking hands. The tires screeched as we peeled out of the lot, leaving the mall and that thing inside it behind us. Only once we were well away from the abandoned building, streetlights glowing, and civilization returning to view, did we finally exhale. I looked at Jake, still breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. Without saying a word, I reached over and gave him a firm handshake, maybe the strongest handshake I've ever given. Then I got out of the car and called my breath back into my lungs, whispering a quiet, shaky thank you to the friend who might have just saved my life. I used to work the overnight shift at a 24/7 general store tucked inside a mall in South Carolina. The mall itself closed at 9:30 every night, but our store, small, oddly placed, and somehow forgotten by time, stayed open around the clock. We catered to the occasional late-night wanderer, a few graveyard shift workers, or the rare insomniac who needed toothpaste at 2 in the morning. There were 2 entrances to the store. One led directly into the mall itself, connecting us to the rest of the interior shops. The other was a back door, accessible from the outside parking lot, which remained unlocked after mall hours. Every night, part of my routine involved lowering the gate that separated our store from the rest of the mall once it shut down. It was one of those metal roll-down security grills, the kind with narrow vertical gaps that still allowed you to see through into the corridor beyond. It gave a bit of visibility, though not much, just enough to feel connected to the bigger, now slumbering space beyond. Since the store was on the smaller side and business during the deep night hours was minimal, my job was usually uneventful, mind-numbingly so in fact. I'd spend most of the shift organizing shelves, wiping down surfaces, counting inventory just to pass the time. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional buzz from the cooler doors became the soundtrack to my night. But there was one shift that didn't follow that same sleepy rhythm. One shift that stayed with me ever since. It was somewhere in the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning when it happened. The mall had been closed for hours, and the gate separating us from the main hallway was already down. Like always, I could still see through it, just barely. Beyond the metal bars was the long stretch of the mall corridor, cloaked in shadows but dimly lit by the nightlights scattered along the ceiling. The mall always kept those low-level lights on, something about safety protocols or helping security monitor the cameras better. They weren't bright by any means, just enough to sketch vague outlines in the dark. They cast more shadow than clarity, really. And from my spot behind the counter, I found myself staring out through that gate more often than usual. Watching, waiting, feeling like something in that half-lit hallway might be watching back. I was going about my usual routine, stocking shelves, straightening up product displays, doing whatever I could to keep the hours moving, when I heard a sound, a sharp metallic rattle. It came from the front of the store, the gate. I looked up, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing on the other side of the metal grill, gripping it with both hands. His fingers were pale, curled tightly around the bars like he'd been there for a while. At first, I thought it had to be mall security. That was the only thing that made sense. The guards usually stayed in the back offices or patrolled outside, but once in a while, rarely, you'd catch one doing a lap through the mall's interior. Still, it was strange to see one this late, and even stranger that he was just standing there, not saying anything. I stepped around the register and walked toward the gate, squinting through the dim light. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice hesitant but steady. As I got closer, I realized something was off. This wasn't a guard. It wasn't even anyone I recognized. He was just some guy. He wore a dirty black and white plaid shirt, frayed at the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His jeans were huge, several sizes too big, sagging around the ankles like they were melting off him. There were stains all over his clothes, oil or dirt, maybe something worse, hard to tell in the low light. But what unsettled me most wasn't what he was wearing, it was what he was doing. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't even acknowledging my presence. His head was tilted all the way back, chin lifted to the ceiling, eyes fixed straight upward, unblinking, just staring. And all the while, his hands continued to rattle the gate. Not violently, not like he was trying to tear it open, just a slow, rhythmic shake, like the motion was automatic or ritualistic. I took a cautious step forward. "Hey, is something wrong?" I asked again, this time a little softer. "Do you need help?" No answer. No movement. He just kept looking up and kept shaking the gate. A chill spread down my spine. There was a protocol for this kind of situation. I remembered that much from my orientation. Something about contacting mall security if anyone acted suspicious after hours. They had a way to reach them, a number to dial, maybe even an intercom. But I didn't know how to use any of it. I didn't know the number. I didn't know where the call button was. I'd never had to use it before, and no one had ever bothered to properly train me on what to do. So I did the only thing I could. I backed away. I turned my attention elsewhere, and I tried, really tried, to shut it out. But the faint rattling of the gate never fully stopped. It stayed in my ears, even when I moved to the back of the store. Like a subtle alarm, always humming just beneath the surface. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was looking at might still be looking back. I turned my back on the man at the gate and made my way back behind the counter, putting as much distance between us as I could without outright running. Even from there, I couldn't relax. The layout of the store didn't help. The shelves were set up perpendicularly to the counter, not parallel, so I couldn't just hide behind the wall of cereal boxes and pretend he wasn't there. No, he was in plain view from where I stood. Every time I looked up, I could see him, standing right there. Still gripping the gate. still staring up at the ceiling like it was whispering secrets to him. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the register, on the shelves, on anything else, but the sight of him burned into the corner of my vision like a stain on the glass. Then finally, he started to back away. And I mean that literally. He didn't turn and walk off. He just stepped backward, one slow foot after the other, retreating into the dim hallway beyond the gate. And all the while, his head stayed tilted up, eyes never leaving whatever it was he saw on the ceiling. The movement was so unnatural, it made my skin crawl, like watching a video play in reverse or a puppet being pulled by strings. My mind was racing. Where the hell was security? From what I'd been told, there was always at least one person on the overnight team monitoring the cameras. That was the whole point of the nightlights, to make surveillance easier. So where were they now? Why wasn't anyone doing anything? I did my best to shake it off, to push the unease down and bury it under routine. I forced myself to resume my cleaning tasks, brushing off shelves, wiping counters, anything to make the time pass faster. Still, I couldn't help glancing out toward the gate now and then, a nervous habit. Each time I looked, I expected to see him again. But he was gone. Eventually, I heard the soft metallic hiss of the back door sliding open. Someone had come into the store. Finally, an actual customer. At the time, I was between two shelves, restocking some items, and the view of the entrance was blocked. I didn't stop what I was doing, just kept sweeping up the aisle, figuring whoever it was would make their way to the front eventually. After a minute or two, I wrapped up what I was doing and headed back to the register. I was ready to help the customer. Or at least I thought I was. I saw the customer now. He was standing at the far end of the leftmost aisle, the one with the alcohol. At first glance, he looked like he was just browsing. His head was tilted upward, chin raised, eyes locked on the top shelf like he was trying to read the label on a bottle too high to reach. Nothing unusual, not at first. So I looked away. I didn't give him more than a second's thought, just a quick glance. I bent down behind the counter to tuck the broom and dustpan underneath, still running on autopilot. My mind was still fogged by what had happened earlier at the gate, but I was trying to hold it together, trying to convince myself that I was back to normal routine. Then I stood up, and I saw him again, and my heart nearly stopped. He wasn't looking at the shelves anymore. He was looking at me, directly, and he was smiling. Not a grin, not a friendly smirk, but a wide, lip-pressed smile. Too wide, too stiff. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind of smile that feels wrong. My stomach sank, because in that instant, I recognized him. It was the same man, the same one from earlier, the one at the gate. Only now, he was inside the store, and he'd taken off the black and white plaid shirt. Now he stood in just a stained, off-white undershirt, pale arms hanging limply at his sides. I stared at him, and he stared back. We were locked in that moment, frozen in this awful, silent exchange for what felt like 30 seconds, maybe more. Neither of us moved. Neither of us blinked. I felt paralyzed. His smile wasn't just eerie, it was inhuman. Like it had been painted on his face. Something about it, about him, felt like it had crawled out of some deep, unspeakable nightmare. It wasn't a person standing there. It was a presence, a wrongness wrapped in skin. He looked straight through me, like he could see everything, every fear I'd buried, every thought I hadn't said aloud. His eyes didn't shimmer, they didn't twitch. They just drilled into me with that same impossible calm. I opened my mouth, tried to say something. My voice cracked, barely audible. "Get out," I croaked, or I'm calling the cops. My throat was dry. My hands had started to tremble beneath the counter. He didn't move, didn't react, didn't even blink. That smile just stayed there, like it was carved into him. as if the muscles in his face had forgotten how to do anything else. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a horror film, but it was real. This was happening. And I had no idea what was going to happen next. I bolted, turned and sprinted straight to the back room, my hands shaking so badly I nearly fumbled the lock twice before finally twisting it shut behind me. Click. The silence that followed was deafening. Inside that cramped storage room, surrounded by shelves of overstock and cleaning supplies, I pulled out my phone and tried to call my manager. My fingers were slick with sweat, slipping against the screen. She didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. I must have called 4 or 5 times, each one more desperate than the last. My breathing was ragged, shallow. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. Finally, I gave up. And that's when I heard it. Tap. Not a knock, just a soft, delicate tap against the door, like a fingernail brushing the wood. Once, then again. Barely loud enough to register, but unmistakably there. I froze. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just sat there, back pressed against the far wall, eyes fixed on the door like it might burst open any second. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe more. Time stretched and thinned into something surreal. My thoughts were jumbled, racing through worst-case scenarios. What if he came around back? What if he tried the fire exit? What if he never left? All I wanted was to be anywhere but there. But eventually, something shifted inside me. The fear of losing my job, of letting someone loot the store while I cowered in a storage closet, started to outweigh the fear of the man himself. Stupid as it sounds, that's what got me moving again. I stood up, ears straining, hand slowly reaching for the doorknob. I cracked the door open just an inch, just enough to peek out into the store. Empty. The aisles were still. The lights buzzed overhead, just like always. He was gone. I stepped out, slowly, cautiously, made my way up to the counter and scanned the store, heart still racing. I checked the entrance, then the aisles. Nothing. He was gone for good this time. Or at least, he was gone. Later, I reviewed the footage. Our shop has security cameras set up around the floor. Grainy, low-res things, but still useful. They caught everything. When my shift finally ended and morning came, I told my manager what had happened, walked her through it, showed her the video. She watched in stunned silence. Her expression shifted gradually, from disbelief to concern to something closer to fear. She kept rewinding, replaying certain parts, watching the man just stand there, watching him smile. It was clear the footage shook her. It shook me too. I only worked there for another month after that. Then I left, moved on. But even now, I still think about that smile sometimes. And I still wonder, what the hell was he looking at on the ceiling?